Hey boys, it's HarmNone. Today, we're going to be going over the top 10 arena war vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online. Now, this list isn't necessarily in terms of how effective they are within the arena. This list is more about free mode, and some of my choices will definitely reflect that. So anyway, let's get into it. We're going to go ahead and start off with number 10. To start off with, we have the Weenie Issy Classic. Now, the Weenie Issy Classic is a pretty good arena war vehicle. This thing is pretty quick. These machine guns are pretty nice. They do quite a bit of damage. The only thing is they are mounted on the roof of the vehicle, so sometimes it is actually pretty hard to stay on target. However, they are facing downwards slightly, so that does make it a little bit easier. On top of that, the Weenie Issy Classic also has a ramp on the front of it, which you can use to flip cars over, like you guys can see that I'm doing. On top of that, it's also got all this crazy customization you can do to it, so that is a nice feature. Now, the reason that this thing is at number 10, despite its agility and its relatively good speed, this thing has absolutely no armor, and it also has no window protection whatsoever, so if you're driving this in free mode, somebody can spam you right through any of the windows on this thing and you will die instantly. That is the reason that it's at number 10, however, it is still a pretty good vehicle, and I would say that I definitely recommend picking it up if you don't have one already. Oh, and before I forget to mention it, it's also got a mortar that you can launch out of the back of the vehicle. Now, this is pretty unique. There's not many vehicles that have this. However, it doesn't do very much damage, unfortunately, so it's not the greatest thing ever, but it is still pretty cool. Anyway, guys, that is it for the Weenie Issy Classic. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up at number 9, we have the Cerberus. Now, the Cerberus is a very, very large vehicle, one of the biggest vehicles you can get in Grand Theft Auto Online. Now, because this thing is such a huge vehicle, it is very, very slow. Albeit in free mode, it's not that bad, but I've heard that in the arena, it can be quite a pain. It does have this giant thing on the front of it here, which can absolutely just mulch vehicles, which is pretty cool. And its biggest and best feature probably is the flamethrower that's mounted to the top of this thing. Similar to the fire truck's water cannon, except, well, it doesn't shoot water, it shoots fire. So we're going to test it on this innocent man right here. As you guys can see, it's pretty good. It works. It does its job. It does shoot flames indeed, and you know, it's pretty good for that, I guess. As you guys can see, you can cook people pretty effectively, so that is pretty fun, I have to say. Now, it does have bullet-resistant windows, but it doesn't have much armor protection, and the other problem with the Cerberus, well, maybe problem, is that this thing is the most expensive arena war vehicle in the entire game. So you do have to pay quite a price in order to get yourself this thing. And I mean, it's good and it's fun, and the flamethrower is very unique. It's one of the most unique things in the entire game, as far as I'm concerned. However, it is a lot of money, and the thing is quite a chore to drive around. Even on the streets of Los Santos, I am finding myself running into trees while driving this thing, and stuff like that, just going around the corners throughout the city. So that is a little bit annoying, but it is still a pretty fun vehicle, and I mean, roasting people alive is kind of like hilarious, so you know, the Cerberus is not a bad vehicle overall, and for that reason, it's ahead of the Weenie Issy Classic at number 9. Next up, at number 8, we have the Brutus. Now, the Brutus is a pretty cool vehicle. It does have this crazy looking mega blade on the front of it, they call it, which does allow you to absolutely ruin anything that comes in front of your vehicle. On top of this, it also has a side-mounted machine gun, as you guys can see on the left-hand side of the vehicle. It is offset, which is quite annoying, but it still is a pretty good machine gun, and I personally don't mind it that much. On top of that, it also does a lot of damage. Now, the Brutus is actually a pretty quick vehicle. I have to say, it's definitely one of the quicker arena war vehicles out there. The handling is pretty good. Really, there's nothing to complain about performance-wise with this thing. It is just pretty damn quick. Now, unfortunately, it is only a 2-seater. The back 2 seats are not available to be sat in once you make this thing into an arena war vehicle, so that is a little bit annoying. It does also have proximity mines that you can drop behind it, which are pretty good. They are oil slick mines by default, so that is a little bit annoying. However, this mega blade on the front of this thing, as you guys can see, you can pretty much get anything that's in your way out of your way using it. It's also got this blade on the rear of it, so if you pull up to any civilians that are giving you trouble, you can be sure that they will die instantly when they make contact with that, or with the blade on the front. Both of the blades are highly effective at civilian dispersion, if you will, so it's really good for that. If you want to run missions with something like this thing, it's not a bad idea. Now, unfortunately, the windows are not really bulletproof on the front half of the vehicle. However, you won't get shot through the back because, as you guys can see, there is armor plating covering all the back windows. And as you guys can see, I'm just going to demonstrate the Mega Blade for you. It pretty much insta-kills anything that you touch. And I shouldn't even say pretty much. It does. It insta-kills anything that you touch with this thing. So overall, the Brutus is a pretty cool vehicle. And definitely one that I would recommend picking up if you're getting into the Arena War stuff. However, there are better vehicles coming up ahead, so stay tuned for those. Let's move on to number 7. Next up at number 7, we have the Dominator. Now this is the Future Shock Dominator, so that's why it looks like this. Now the Dominator is an interesting vehicle. It's not the best Arena War vehicle, however it is very good, I have to say, because I mean it is the Vapid Dominator. This thing has always been a pretty damn good vehicle. Of course, like the regular Dominator, it is very, very quick in a straight line. However, with the Arena War upgrades on this thing, it does have this big ramp on the front of it, which will allow you to move vehicles that are in your way out of your way, unless they're a garbage truck because they're a little bit too big. But, you know, Albany Cavalcade, goodbye. Basically, you can turn this thing into a ramp buggy, but just without being a ramp buggy, and it's a Vapid Dominator, so it's a little bit quicker. As well as this, it also has front-mounted machine guns. As you guys can see, they are dual. They are on both sides of the vehicle. They are pretty goddamn effective, I have to say. Now, the only thing with the Dominator is it does not have very good window protection for its occupants, and it has relatively weak armor. So those really are my two complaints with this thing. However, it does have proximity oil slick mines that you can drop behind it, as well as this really huge like shield thing in the back that does kind of stop you from being able to be shot from behind, which is pretty nice, I have to say. Overall, the Dominator is pretty good. I feel like this thing doesn't really need to be talked about that much. I feel like everybody knows, you know, what the Dominator is capable of. The Arena War upgrades just, well, pretty much put machine guns on it and put this giant ramp on the front of it, which, you know, makes the vehicle a little bit more fun to drive, you could argue. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for the Vapid Dominator. Let's move on to number 6. Next up at number 6, we have the Bruiser. Now, in order to make the Bruiser, you need to take a Benefactor Glendale and upgrade it within the Arena War workshop. The Bruiser is a very fun vehicle, and I can attest to this, and I've really not been using this thing for very long, but it truly is such a blast of a vehicle. It has dual mounted machine guns on the front of it. They aren't centered, which is kind of annoying, but they are at a semi-decent height, although they are a little bit too high for my liking, but I mean, they're okay. It also has a nitrous boost similar to all of the other vehicles on this list, and it's also got a jump boost as well, which is pretty nice to have. Now, similar to some other vehicles on this list, it's also got this big ramp on the front of it, which of course you can use to get anything that's in your way out of your way. The Bruiser is a really fun vehicle, and I only recently started driving this thing, and ever since I got it, I have been quite impressed. It's a very fun vehicle to drive because, I mean, obviously it's a massive limo with all kinds of, you know, things on it, so it's not really, probably doesn't really need an explanation as to why it's fun. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't really have any armor protection or window protection for that matter, so that is slightly annoying, but it is still a really cool and definitely a really fun vehicle. So for those reasons, I would definitely recommend picking up a Bruiser. It's the one car on this list that I can really vouch for because I have had ample time driving it, and I can confirm this thing is a lot of fun. Anyway, guys, that is pretty much it for the Bruiser at number 6. Let's move on to the vehicle at number 5. Next up at number 5, we have the Scarab. Now, the Scarab is a really, really cool vehicle in Grand Theft Auto Online. One that I wish that I kind of knew about a lot sooner. Now, don't get me wrong, I've seen this thing driving around, I've seen other players using it, and honestly, it's just such a sick vehicle. Now, as you guys can see, it is highly effective at taking out civilian targets. It's also got a single middle-mounted machine gun on the top of this thing as well, which is pretty effective. I do like this thing. I like its positioning. It's aimed very nicely. The Scarab is pretty quick when it comes to acceleration. However, it could be a lot faster, so that is kind of a problem with this thing. It does have this big ramp on the front of it, which I will demonstrate after I'm done, you know, running through this crowd. Just give me a second. It is pretty good for moving vehicles out of the way, and due to this thing having tracks, it is actually very, very good off-road and in very steep conditions. For example, if you wanted to climb Mount Chiliad in this thing, the Scarab is going to be a pretty good vehicle to do so. It's shockingly fast for being a tank. I would not expect this thing to be as quick as it is, and it's honestly a lot of fun to drive. Of course, it's also got proximity mines that you can drop behind it, and it does have a jump boost as well. Overall, the Scarab is definitely one of the cooler looking Arena War vehicles in my opinion. Definitely one of the more realistic looking ones as well, which if you're into realism, then I mean, you'll probably like this thing. Obviously, as you guys can see, mine's got all kinds of spikes and stuff on it, but without all of those, it actually does look pretty realistic. So that's pretty much it for number 5 with the Scarab tank. This thing is pretty awesome. The only problem is that it really isn't that bulletproof. However, it does have the best armor out of every other arena war vehicle, being able to take about 6 RPGs before it blows up. So that is a big bonus with the Scarab tank. Anyway guys, that's it for number 5. Let's move on to number 4. Next up at number 4, we have the Sasquatch. Now this is a really fun vehicle. If you will, it's kind of like the third monster truck of Grand Theft Auto Online that's just not really, on war stock as a buyable monster truck. This thing is shockingly fast for what it is. I mean, basically a monster truck, like I said, but it's really good for getting other vehicles out of your way. It reminds me of the Insurgent, the way that it just throws things out of the way, except it's got this ramp on the front, so it's kind of even better than the Insurgent. On top of that, it's also got a grenade launcher that you can shoot out of the front of it. Now, this thing is a little bit useless, but I mean, it's okay. It kind of does something. Unfortunately, anything else that's mounted on the front of this thing, well, just doesn't really work. There's no front-mounted machine gun, so that is kind of piss. However, that's not really why you buy this thing. I mean, you buy it because it's a super fast monster truck with a ramp on the front of it that can just throw vehicles out of the way. On top of that, it's also a pretty cool vehicle. I mean, I can't lie, this thing is awesome looking, and my 6-year-old self definitely would have really approved of this thing. Overall, the Sasquatch is here just because, I mean, it's just an awesome vehicle. I mean, why wouldn't I put it at number 4? Maybe it could have even been higher, and it does also have semi-bullet resistant windows, so that is just another bonus with this vehicle. That's pretty much it for the Sasquatch, guys, at number 4. Let's move on to number 3. Next up at number 3, we have the Declasse Impaler. Now the Impaler is an awesome arena war vehicle. This thing is super fast in a straight line, and on top of that, it's also got pretty decent armor protection as well as window protection for the occupants inside. Now the handling on this vehicle is a little bit questionable. It can be a little bit much to deal with sometimes, but for the most part I do find it semi-drivable, which is pretty good for a muscle car. Depending on the version of this thing in which you get, some of the versions have better window protection than others, although the armor protection for all of the vehicles is exactly the same. Now the reason that this thing made it so high is because of the semi-good armor protection and the semi-good window protection over the Dominator. It's also pretty quick in a straight line with kind of bad handling, very similar to the Dominator. I would actually give the edge to the Dominator in the handling department, although the Impaler is really not that bad either. This thing is pretty fun to drive, I have to say. I am enjoying driving it, and it's definitely got a lot of customization, very similar to all of the other arena war vehicles, so it's definitely a pretty good one to pick up. However, it's just still not quite the best. So with that being said, let's move on to number 2. Next up, we have the Vapid Imperator. Now this is one of the best arena war vehicles that has come out, and it's definitely one of my favorites. This thing actually looks super sick when it's a clean vehicle, but obviously it also looks pretty sick right now. Now the Imperator is super high on this list because it has very good window protection. As you guys can see, the holes in this thing which you can shoot through are very limited. On top of that, it's also got blades on the side, the rear, and of course it has the big one on the front. All of these mean you can destroy anything that gets near you, as you guys can see, and as you guys saw earlier, the front mounted Mega Blade is absolutely deadly, and when it comes to AI or civilians, whoever you're trying to chop up, I mean, any of these blades will do the trick. The Imperator actually has very decent handling, I find too, so that is another thing that I really like about this vehicle. Now on top of that, it's also got a rear mounted mortar, and in addition to that, it's also got dual 50 cal machine guns on the hood. So this is very good. Now these are not quite centered, but they are at a very good height, so you can hit other vehicles or civilian targets very effectively with these, I find. Now the only place that the Imperator really struggles is just off the line. I mean, the acceleration is absolutely piss weak. However, the handling is pretty good, and once you get moving, the Imperator's acceleration is actually pretty good, I have to say. Overall, the Imperator is the second best arena war vehicle. You guys can probably guess what the number 1 vehicle is because it's probably the same for pretty much everybody. With that being said, we're done with number 2. Let's move on to number 1. And at number 1, of course, we have the Anis ZR380. The ZR380 is at the number 1 spot because this thing has absolutely fantastic armor protection. As you guys can see, you cannot shoot through the front windshield on this vehicle, nor can you shoot through the rear windshield on this vehicle either. Now, the side windows are a different story. Obviously, you can shoot through these and you will be able to hit the driver very easily. However, being protected from the front and the back is very, very good. In addition to that, this thing also does have the front mounted Mega Blade, which does absolutely destroy any vehicle that comes in your path. It's got the side mounted blades as well, and the rear mounted for taking out those pesky NPCs like this guy right here. As you guys can see, we're going to remove his foot surgically, of course. There we go. Very, very effective, as you guys can see. On top of that, the ZR350 is in the sports category, and it is the only vehicle that came out with the Arena War DLC to be in the sports category, so it is pretty good. And this, of course, means that the performance of this vehicle is quite nice. Now, it does handle somewhat like a drift car, which is pretty odd to me. However, it's not the worst ever. On top of that, it's also got center-mounted machine guns, which are very nice and make hitting your target very easy. They're mounted at about the perfect height to take out vehicles. Really no complaints from me in that department either. Overall, the ZR380 is regarded as the best Arena War vehicle by pretty much anybody that you ask. This thing is absolutely awesome, and it's also a very clean looking vehicle, being based pretty heavily off of a Nissan 350Z, obviously, but it's got all this other kind of junk on it. But regardless of that, it is still a very nice car, very fun to drive, sounds good. Overall, just an awesome vehicle. And of course, it does have proximity mines that you can drop behind it, so just an extra bonus, you know, why not? Anyway guys, there you have it. That has been my top 10 Arena War vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online. If you guys enjoyed this video, if you learned something, a like is of course appreciated, if not dislike. Subscribe if you guys are new, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, take care. Peace.